Hello, my name is Henry Posner. I'm chairman of Railroad Development Corporation, and I'm here today at Transaction to talk about a new initiative which we are undertaking with our UK joint venture partner, Viva Rail. It's called Pop-Up Metro, and the concept is basically that we will rent trains and platforms so that you out there in transit land can test a metro system for whatever you might pay a consultant to study it, so that you can do projects with more assurance that the market's actually there by actually testing it out in the marketplace. So one of the main objections to transit projects is that you spend hundreds of millions of dollars only to find out after you've built the system what the market is. What we're proposing is a product which will allow you to essentially de-risk the project by trying a metro system out in advance using light density freight lines. So why should this be of interest to New Jersey? Well, there are lots of relatively light density freight lines in the state where freight services might operate once a day. And if you can figure out a way to run the freight trains at night and the passenger service or the transit service during the day, then you've got something. And actually, this is not a radical idea. This is something which has been done on the Camden to Trenton River line for enough time that it's basically an accepted practice. The other interesting thing about the New Jersey market is New Jersey is a relatively transit-centric state that's tried a lot of different models. Public sector, public, private, etc. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is put up some slides about Pop-Up Metro. These slides will be on our website, so they'll be available to you to look in more detail. But what I really want to do is just touch on the highlights so that you can do your own digging, either on the information we're going to provide or do your own research and see what you come up with. But what I believe is that in many cases, this presents an interesting alternative which people might not have thought of before. So without further ado, let me get into it and talk again about the Viva Rail business. And let me emphasize what we're talking about here is creating value for light density urban freight lines. And by light density, what I mean is lines where you're basically running freight service once a day or perhaps even less. And again, all this is going to be on our website, so these links will be available to you. And give you a little bit of a description of our company, Pittsburgh-based. If you look at the logos of these companies, they're fairly diverse. The Iowa Interstate Railroad is a Class 2 medium-sized freight railroad in the Midwestern USA. The lower right-hand corner, RegioRail is a French freight operator. And in the middle, you see the logos, for example, of the Alpenzilt Nacht Express. We run intercity passenger services in Germany. And in fact, before coronavirus, we were the second largest operator in Germany as measured by train miles. But the most important theme among all these different businesses is that they are joint ventures. And we always do things with partners, or at least try to do so. And if you look at the joint venture philosophy, that takes us to Viva Rail, which is a joint venture with Adrian Shooter and his colleagues in the UK. So Adrian Shooter was the founder of Chiltern Railways, which is generally considered to be one of the most successful of the privatized passenger operators that emerged in the UK, which I would argue is the world leader for private sector operation of passenger services. You can argue about the model, but I would argue that just like the USA is the leader in short line railroads, feeder services for freight, the UK has done a lot in the area of private sector operation of passenger services. And again, you can argue about the model, but the fact is that since privatization, passenger traffic has doubled on the UK railways. So the trains are essentially upcycled from a class of London Underground trains, which ran on the intercity network. Let me emphasize, this is a new train. Basically, the body shell has been recycled. Everything else is new. And it's done in a modular manner, meaning that we started off with diesel versions. Now we're producing hybrid versions, and we're evolving toward battery technology. And it's proven enough that you can go to the UK and see these trains in service. For example, we got 3 trains, the diesel version running on the West Midlands franchise as of April of last year. And we're currently in the process of delivering hybrid trains to Wales for rural and suburban services. But as far as the versions we're producing for the USA, we're going to stick with battery trains. We don't see much of a future for diesel. And so, possibly hydrogen down the pike, but we will be introducing our product in the USA as a battery train. And again, these are new trains in a modular format. So let's look at the battery version. And please note that the range is 60 miles, more or less, with a charge at each end. Given the size of New Jersey, there are not a lot of applications in New Jersey where you would be bumping up against the range for these trains, because the likely applications are going to be shuttles and feeders and stuff like that, as opposed to relatively long distance routes, especially on a test basis like we're proposing for Pop-Up Metro. And if you look at the interiors of the trains, I think this is the best evidence of how we can customize them. We are going to be producing a exhibition train in addition to the operational train with the battery configuration, so that you'll be actually able to see the potential. One of the cars will have a first class section, a cafe, et cetera, and really give people a taste for what is possible with these modular, flexible trains. And needless to say, recycling the existing aluminum body is also an energy benefit. As you add that to the battery configuration, this is a very green product. So let me be clear as to where the trains are being used in the UK right now. This is a mainline train, and with the many doors on the train, we like to describe them as being crowd busting. So keep in mind that while the acceleration and speed is important, it's station dwell time that also significantly impacts the overall running time. And the doors are a competitive advantage here. So if you want to ride the trains, no problem. You can go to London and ride the West Coast Main Line about 45 minutes toward Bletchley. And these trains are in hourly service on the Bedford to Bletchley line, which is a main line, which is shared with freight traffic. And here are some views of the hybrid trains, which we're delivering to Wales. These are for commuter services and rural services. But let's look at the example which is probably more relevant for New Jersey, and that is use of existing light density freight lines for demonstration operations for less than the cost of a consultant study so that you can test the market and de-risk projects and get them up and running sooner. That's what Pop-Up Metro is all about. And with the Pop-Up Metro project, that will include temporary modular platforms in addition to the trains, as well as the operational regime that it takes to get Federal Railroad Administration authorization to operate under temporal separation, which again is not a new concept, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but there is really nothing here which is radically new, but rather it's the combination thereof. So we'll provide the trains, lease them. We'll provide the charging infrastructure. We'll provide the platforms. Now this is an interesting set of photos because they're from 3 years ago where we did a demonstration at a trade fair in the UK. And I actually got on one of our trains, the train pictured here, rode out to the main line, and then using 6 other trains, made an intercity trip to visit some family friends. So I actually used the Viva Rail train to make an intercity journey. But let's get back to temporal separation, which again is an accepted practice. And you'll find examples all over the USA. Probably the best one is actually in New Jersey with the Camden and Trenton River Line, where an existing freight rail corridor was repurposed as a transit corridor with freight trains running at night. And here is some of the technical background on how that's achieved. But again, this is pretty much a standard practice. Let's go back to that previous slide. You can see it's been done all over the USA. This is nothing new. So where we're looking in the USA for Pop-Up Metro is a couple different types of applications. One, a seasonal tourist shuttle using an existing freight rail right-of-way with a commuter piece to it. And second would be a startup commuter service or metro service between an urban center and one of its suburbs, running over a privately owned railroad. Other applications could be connections to intercity rail or suburban rail or whatever. But I think the last bullet point is most interesting: local interest. Everything depends on what the local interest is. So what we're doing in 2021 is we will be bringing the trains to the USA. Late 2020, early 2021, we will have a demonstration operation in central Pennsylvania, which will be close enough to target markets like New Jersey, where you can actually go see it. People will not believe it until you got the trains running. So our idea is to have the demonstration line set up within a couple hours of New Jersey hours, meaning by car, regrettably, not by train, so that you can actually go see it. And so the idea will be, if there are areas in New Jersey, around the country, where you've got the combination of mobility challenges, host railroads, most likely private freight railroads interested in increasing the utilization of their corridors, and finally local sponsors, could be public sector, private sector, or a nonprofit sector. The combination of the three, then we've got something. So here's some contact information. And again, here's the web links. Toward the back, there are lots of technical details. And there's lots here to go through. And by the way, just go on the web and check out what's on, for example, YouTube, and see what various people have done to document how these trains are operating in the UK. Don't believe me? Go to the web. Please check it out. So let's go back to why I think this is interesting for New Jersey. New Jersey is a transit-centric state where there's every possible mode of transportation and lots of different models, public sector, private sector, et cetera. There's not a lot that hasn't been tried here. But what we would like to do is take a different approach than's been taken in the past, where, for example, build something like the River Line, you spend $200 million, and then you find out whether there's a market. What we want to do is give local markets the opportunity to test a metro system and confirm the market before you go out and spend all the money, and actually get something up and running before the government changes, and you might have somebody coming along in the next government who is not necessarily a pro-transit type person. So it will accelerate and de-risk transit projects, while at the same time, I would argue, make the pie bigger. Now, one of the objections that I've heard is that by not building the whole thing from scratch and gold plating it, it won't create as many jobs. Well, I would argue that if your agenda really is job creation, then this is still the way to go, because what it'll do is it will make the pie bigger for transit because it'll be less risky. And if you want to go back, having proved the market, and then gold plate it, no problem. But you can do so with a higher confidence that somebody is actually going to use the system. So with that, I'd like to close and thank Kelvin McCavanagh for inviting me to talk here. And I hope we'll get some really good questions about pop-up metro. I think this is a great opportunity for New Jersey. I commuted from Newark for 5 years in different directions. If you can look around the USA for opportunities, great. But New Jersey, I think, has got the single biggest concentration of opportunities. And I hope that some of you out there in transit land will agree with me, and that we'll figure out some way to make this happen in the Garden State. So thank you very much.